Horror movies offer a safe way to experience fear from the comfort of a living room couch. We tell ourselves it is just a movie and that the monsters on the screen cannot hurt us in the real world. However, the most terrifying films are often the ones rooted in actual events that are far stranger and darker than fiction. When the credits roll and the lights come back on, the true horror remains, because the inspiration came from real human suffering. Tonight we open the Midnight Docket to reveal the disturbing true crime cases and historical tragedies that breathed life into the most iconic nightmares of cinema. From the quiet farmhouses of the American Midwest to the bustling streets of university towns, no place is safe from the darkness that inspires Hollywood screenwriters. These stories do not rely on supernatural special effects or jump scares to instill terror in the hearts of those who hear them. They rely on the cold and hard facts of police reports and the chilling testimonies of witnesses who saw the face of evil. We will explore the twisted mind of a Wisconsin handyman, the shark attacks that turned a summer paradise into a feeding ground, and the possessed boy who terrified priests. The truth is always scarier. Our first case takes us to Plainfield, Wisconsin in the late 1950s, where a seemingly harmless loner named Ed Gein lived in squalor. Gein was a man who kept to himself and was known by locals as odd, but generally harmless, until a hardware store owner named Bernice Worden vanished. The police investigation led them to the dilapidated Gein farmhouse, where they expected to find a simple robbery gone wrong or perhaps a misunderstanding. What they found inside the House of Horrors would permanently alter the landscape of American crime and inspire three of the most famous horror films in history. Sheriff Art Schley and his deputies entered the Gein property on a cold November night and were immediately assaulted by a stench of decay and filth. The house was a chaotic mess of trash and debris, but amidst the clutter were artifacts that defied all logic and sanity. They discovered furniture and clothing made from human skin and bowls crafted from skulls resting casually on the shelves. In a shed nearby, the headless body of Bernice Worden hung from the rafters, dressed out like a deer. The sheer brutality and grotesque creativity of the crimes suggested a mind completely detached from reality. The investigation revealed that Ed Gein had been robbing graves in local cemeteries for years to fashion his macabre trophies. He admitted to digging up the bodies of middle-aged women he thought resembled his deceased, domineering mother Augusta. This obsession with his mother and the desire to create a woman's suit from human skin became the direct inspiration for the character Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. His twisted relationship with his mother also formed the basis for Norman Bates in Psycho. The sheer isolation and gore found at his farm mirrored the terrifying family dynamic seen in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We now travel back in time to the summer of 1916, along the Jersey Shore, where a heat wave drove thousands of tourists to the refreshing Atlantic waters. Swimming in the ocean was a relatively new pastime, and the concept of a shark attacking a human was virtually unheard of by the general public. Scientists at the time believed that sharks did not have the jaw strength to crush human bone. That false sense of security was shattered when a young man named Charles Vansant was attacked while swimming in Beach Haven. The incident was dismissed by many as a fluke or attributed to a different animal entirely. 5 days later, and 45 miles to the north, another attack occurred in Spring Lake, claiming the life of a bellboy named Charles Bruder. The ocean turned red with blood as lifeguards pulled his maimed body to the shore in front of horrified hotel guests. Panic began to spread across the coast like a wildfire as news of the man-eater dominated the headlines. Despite the hysteria, many people still refused to stay out of the water, believing that steel shark nets would protect them. The terror reached its peak when the predator moved away from the ocean and swam into the brackish waters of Mattoon Creek. In the narrow inland waterway of Mattoon Creek, a 12-year-old boy named Lester Stillwell was pulled under the water by the shark. A local tailor named Stanley Fisher dove in to save the boy, but he too was savagely attacked and later died from severe blood loss. The realization that a massive shark could hunt in a small creek terrified the nation and sparked a massive shark hunt involving dynamite and guns. This series of attacks over 12 days in July 1916 served as the primary historical inspiration for Peter Benchley when he wrote the novel Jaws. The story of The Exorcist is widely considered the scariest movie of all time, but the real events behind it are even more unsettling. In 1949, a young boy known by the pseudonym Roland Doe began experiencing strange phenomena in his home in Cottage City, Maryland. It started with scratching sounds in the walls and the unexplained movement of furniture and religious icons. The family was Lutheran, but in their desperation they reached out to the Catholic Church for assistance. They believed that the boy had become possessed after using a Ouija board with his aunt shortly before she died. Father William Bowdern, along with other Jesuit priests, was granted permission to perform a major exorcism on the terrified boy. The ritual took place over several weeks at Alexian Brothers Hospital in St. Louis, Missouri, where the boy had been moved for safety. Witnesses reported seeing the bed shaking violently, and words like hell and evil appearing as red welts on the skin of the boy. The boy spoke in a guttural voice and showed an aversion to sacred objects that the priests brought into the room. The ordeal was physically and mentally exhausting for everyone involved in the spiritual battle. The priests continued the rite of exorcism despite the violent outbursts and the supernatural occurrences that seemed to defy the laws of physics. On Easter Monday, the boy suddenly awoke and declared that the demon had gone, leaving the room with a loud boom like a gunshot. Roland Doe went on to live a normal life, and the official diary of the exorcism was locked away in the archives. When author William Peter Blatty heard about the case, while a student at Georgetown University, he used the details to craft his terrifying novel. The Amityville Horror is a name synonymous with haunted houses and demonic pigs, but the origin is a very real mass murder. On November 13, 1974, 23-year-old Ronald DeFeo Jr. burst into a local bar screaming that his parents had been shot. Police rushed to the large Dutch colonial home at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York. Inside, they found a scene of utter devastation, with 6 members of the DeFeo family lying dead in their beds. The parents and 4 siblings had all been shot with a .35 caliber lever-action Marlin rifle. The investigation was puzzling because all of the victims were found face down in their beds with no signs of a struggle. Neighbors reported hearing the family dog barking, but surprisingly, no one heard the loud gunshots that claimed 6 lives. Ronald DeFeo Jr. initially claimed a mob hitman was responsible, but his story quickly fell apart under police interrogation. He eventually confessed to the killings, claiming that voices in the house had told him to do it. He was convicted on 6 counts of second-degree murder and sentenced to 25 years to life. The horror story continued a year later when the Lutz family purchased the home, knowing its tragic history. George and Kathy Lutz, along with their 3 children, moved in hoping for a fresh start in the beautiful waterfront property. They lasted only 28 days before fleeing the house in terror, leaving all their possessions behind. They claimed to experience green slime oozing from walls, cold spots, and glowing red eyes peering through windows. While skeptics call it a hoax, their account became the basis for the book and film that launched a franchise. In August 1990, the college town of Gainesville, Florida, was paralyzed by a series of brutal murders that targeted students. The killer broke into the apartments of young women and unleashed a wave of violence that shocked the community. The bodies were posed in grotesque ways, intended to shock the police and the press who arrived at the scene. The atmosphere of paranoia was palpable, as students slept in groups and gun sales in the area skyrocketed. This real-life reign of terror was the direct inspiration for the screenwriter Kevin Williamson when he wrote the script for Scream. The man behind the mask was not a ghost, but a drifter named Danny Rolling who had a history of violence and abuse. Rolling camped in the woods near the university and stalked his victims before striking in the dead of night. He was eventually caught after robbing a grocery store, and DNA evidence linked him to the gruesome crime scenes. The character of Ghostface in the movie Scream mirrors the stealth and brutality of Rolling, although the movie adds a layer of satire. The reality of the Gainesville Ripper was far more grim and lacked the meta-humor found in the film. Wes Craven created one of the most iconic movie monsters in Freddy Krueger, but the idea came from a medical mystery. In the late 1970s, a wave of healthy refugees from Southeast Asia began dying in their sleep without any clear cause. These men were Hmong refugees who had fled the war-torn regions of Laos and settled in the United States. They suffered from terrifying nightmares and refused to sleep for days, fearing that something in their dreams would kill them. Doctors were baffled as the men had no underlying heart conditions or physical ailments. The phenomenon was eventually named Sudden Unexplained Nocturnal Death Syndrome, or SUNDS, by medical researchers. One specific case involved a young boy who stayed awake for days drinking coffee and trying to avoid the terrors of sleep. When he finally succumbed to exhaustion, his parents heard screams from his room, but he was dead before they reached him. They found a hidden coffee pot and unprescribed sleeping pills under his bed. This tragic story of a boy terrified to sleep struck a chord with Wes Craven. Craven took the concept of a dream that can kill you and gave it a physical form in the scarred villain Freddy Krueger. While the movie features a slasher with a glove of knives, the core fear is the biological reality of sleep death. The Hmong community believed that malevolent spirits were responsible for the deaths due to improper burial rites or guilt. Science has since linked the deaths to a genetic heart arrhythmia, but the mystery remains chilling. The idea that we are most vulnerable when we sleep is a primal fear that transcends culture. In 1974, a woman named Doris Bither living in Culver City, California, claimed she was being assaulted by invisible forces. Bither was a single mother who reported that 3 spectral entities were attacking her and her children in their home. Unlike many haunting cases, Bither had physical bruises and bite marks that she claimed were inflicted by the spirits. She contacted parapsychologists Carrie Gaynor and Bari Taff to investigate the disturbing claims. The case became known as the entity haunting and was one of the most violent poltergeist cases on record. The investigators witnessed strange phenomena, including lights and cabinets opening and closing on their own. The most famous piece of evidence was a series of photographs that appeared to show arcs of light hovering around Bither. In one terrifying instance, witnesses claimed to see a greenish mist form in the corner of the room and take the shape of a torso. Bither was thrown across the room by an unseen force, while the investigators watched in helpless horror. The case was never fully explained, and the family eventually moved away to escape the torment. Skeptics argued that Doris Bither had a traumatic past, and that the phenomena were a result of psychokinesis or elaborate hoaxes. However, the physical evidence and the testimony of credible witnesses made it difficult to dismiss the case entirely. The story was adapted into a novel, and later a film titled The Entity, which depicted the assaults in graphic detail. The real Doris Bither continued to struggle with the trauma of her experiences until her death. Her story remains a disturbing example of a haunting that caused verified physical harm to the victim. The Australian outback is a vast and unforgiving landscape that serves as the setting for the horror film Wolf Creek. The movie features a sadistic killer who preys on backpackers and tourists in the remote wilderness. This fictional story draws heavy inspiration from the real-life crimes of Ivan Milat, known as the backpacker murderer. Between 1989 and 1992, Milat murdered 7 young tourists in the Belanglo State Forest south of Sydney. He picked up hitchhikers and drove them into the forest where he bound and executed them. Another influence on the film was the case of Bradley John Murdoch, who attacked a British couple in the Northern Territory. In 2001, Peter Falconio and his girlfriend Joanne Lees were driving a camper van when they were flagged down by Murdoch. Murdoch shot Falconio and attempted to abduct Lees, who managed to escape into the bush and hide for hours. The terrifying isolation of the outback and the vulnerability of tourists on lonely highways are central themes in both the crimes and the film. The vast emptiness of the landscape makes it the perfect hunting ground for predators. While often categorized as a thriller, the story of Henry Howard Holmes and his murder castle is pure horror. During the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago, Holmes constructed a hotel designed specifically for murder. The building was a labyrinth of soundproof rooms, secret passages, trapdoors, and chutes that led to the basement. Holmes lured young women seeking employment or lodging into his hotel, where they were never seen again. He was a charming con artist who used the chaos of the fair to mask his dark activities. The layout of the castle included gas lines rigged to asphyxiate guests in their sleep, and a kiln in the basement to destroy evidence. Holmes confessed to 27 murders, but some estimates suggest the number could be as high as 200. The sheer scale of his operation and the architectural planning involved make him one of the most prolific serial killers in history. His story inspired the character of James March and the Hotel Cortez in the television series American Horror Story Hotel. The idea of a building designed to kill is a terrifying architectural nightmare. The movie The Strangers depicts a couple being terrorized by 3 masked intruders in a remote vacation home. Director Brian Bertino cited the Manson family murders and the Keddy cabin murders as key inspirations for the film. The Keddy murders occurred in 1981 in a resort cabin in the Sierra Nevada foothills of California. 4 people were bound and killed with knives and hammers in a brutal attack that remains unsolved to this day. The randomness of the violence is what makes these cases so particularly frightening. In the film, when the victims ask why they are being attacked, the killer simply replies, "Because you were home." This line echoes the senseless nature of the Manson murders, where the victims were chosen simply because of their location. The fear of a home invasion by strangers with no motive other than a desire to inflict pain is a universal anxiety. The Keddy cabin case remains a cold case, leaving the community with unanswered questions and a lingering sense of dread. The lack of a clear motive is often more terrifying than a calculated revenge plot. Alien abduction movies often rely on the account of Travis Walton to ground their stories in reality. In 1975, Walton was working with a logging crew in the Apache Sitgreaves National Forests in Arizona. The crew reported seeing a large saucer-shaped object hovering above the trees, glowing with a strange light. Walton approached the craft and was reportedly struck by a beam of light that threw him backward. His coworkers fled in terror, and when they returned, Walton was gone. Walton reappeared 5 days later, confused and dehydrated, with a story of being taken aboard the craft. He described terrifying medical procedures performed by small gray beings and human-like figures. The crew passed lie detector tests regarding the event and stuck to their story despite intense skepticism and ridicule. The movie Fire in the Sky dramatizes these events and features some of the most disturbing abduction scenes in cinema history. Whether a hoax or a genuine encounter, the story of Travis Walton remains the most famous abduction case on record. These stories remind us that the boundary between cinematic horror and real-life tragedy is often thinner than we would like to admit. The monsters we see on the screen are often reflections of the very real monsters that walk among us. Filmmakers use these traumatic events to explore the darker side of human nature and our collective fears. By turning these tragedies into entertainment, we attempt to process the incomprehensible violence that exists in the world. However, we must never forget the real victims whose suffering provided the raw material for our nightmares. As you lock your doors tonight and check the windows, remember that the scariest stories are not the ones with ghosts. The scariest stories are the ones where the killer is a neighbor or a drifter or a random stranger passing through town. The truth is often stranger and more terrifying than any script a Hollywood writer could invent. Thank you for joining us on the Midnight Docket, where we shine a light on the shadows of history. Sleep well if you can,